Top of the morning to all of our friends and engaged citizens here with AFPI, and particularly this morning with the Center for Election Integrity. As you now know from that video that I am Ken Blackwell, the chairman of the Center for Election Integrity. Let me just say that they gave me 3 outstanding speakers and panelists because they know that I am a generalist, which means that generally speaking, I am generally speaking. My wife says what that really means is that you're talking more and more about less and less. So we have frontline leaders to sort of stimulate the discussion this morning. As I said in that opening video, the foundation of American system of self-governance is liberty. And the core expression of that liberty is the people having the right and the ability to vote for their representation in free and fair elections. The mission here at CEI is simple. Make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. Our nation's policies that protect just, legal, transparent, and fair elections while recognizing that states, not the federal government, are best suited to determine the time, place, and manner, registration and election day processes, and voter roll management. Every eligible voter should have the opportunity to cast a ballot at one time that is counted once. For decades, I've been engaged in making sure that eligible voters have access to the ballot box, unobstructed by overreaching policies and practices. For the last 15 years, though, I've been working on another voter right, and that is the right of every voter to know that their legally cast ballot is not negated by an illegally cast ballot. And so what we have today at the Center for Election Integrity are some action steps and initiatives that protect the integrity of the ballot box. One, we want to make sure that requiring photo IDs across the nation becomes a common practice. We want to ensure clean, and accurate voter rolls. Corrupt voter rolls are the gateway to fraudulent elections, the gateway to, in fact, destroying the confidence that voters have in the results. And so you can't turn a blind eye to irregularities, constitutional transgressions, illegal actions, and that's what we're guaranteeing you and the voters of America that we will be working on with our folks and fellow integrity protectors across the country. Only 53%, according to the polling that we've looked at, driven by Scott Rasmussen, only 53% believe their vote is counted correctly. That means that just about half of Americans have real serious questions about the integrity of our system. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're here today to do is to say that America First Policy Institute, through its Center for Election Integrity, working with partners like those represented on this panel, are here to make to guarantee that we are a force of resistance against the takedown of our constitutional republic. We need citizens that are ready to engage. We need citizens that really are ready to take the battlefield. Frontliners, not sideliners. And that's why we thank you this morning. Let's get started. Congresswoman Tenney, can you give us your view as to the most serious threat coming from the swamp?
Well, good morning, and thank you to everyone for being here and for supporting America First. This is so important. I'm Claudia Tenney from upstate New York. You may have watched my election transpire over the course of November 2020 into February of 2021, when I was finally sworn in as the very last member of Congress, because my staff, my group, my campaign team spent 100 days in court looking Mark Elias in the eye. Trust me, that's not a pretty picture. He is I call him the sleazy vote trafficking lawyer for the Democrats. He worked on all of Joe Biden's campaign. He is the guy initiating lawsuits all around the country. Doesn't care if they're frivolous or not, but he's not looking at quality, it's quantity, it's chaos, causing us as many problems as we can have. And so after my election landslide, I was up 28,422 votes on Election Day. I ended up winning by only 109. And so it's more than Marionette Miller Meeks from Iowa, who won by 6. So I like to say we're in the landslide caucus. But because of that and what I witnessed in New York with these really lax laws and this vote harvesting that's going on, I formed the Election Integrity Caucus. It's the only one in Congress. It's the first in Congress. And what we do is we collaborate with Ken Blackwell, and you'll hear from the attorneys general and other. We make sure that we put out model legislation. We travel around the country to talk about these big issues. The thing that keeps me up at night right now is this issue of vote harvesting that happened under the Mark Zuckerberg, the Facebook billionaire, spent $419 million on trying to go into the swing states to prime the pump, and a lot of this was legal. That's part of the problem. This was legal. He went in, they tried to get Democratic voters in key areas, places where they knew they could dredge up Democrat votes and get them to vote. Good news is we cracked down on Zuckerbucks. There were states all around the country. I think Ron DeSantis in Florida was one of the first to finally call Zuckerbucks illegal. We have a bill, Stop Zuckerbucks Act. So what this led to is we're making progress. And thanks to AFPI, Ken Blackwell, and the gentleman sitting here, we were able to make some progress. But this is what worries me. After all that has been done, President Biden signed an executive order taking $1 billion in taxpayer money, not the private money from Mark Zuckerberg, but $1 billion in taxpayer money, and is putting it into vote harvesting schemes using HUD, for example, the Small Business Administration, and any bureaucratic arm of the federal government they can use in key areas around our communities to try to get votes out through harvesting and intimidation and manipulation of the people in these vulnerable areas. And this is something that we think, obviously, it's federal overreach, it's a misuse of our tax dollars, but also it's an attempt to federalize our elections sort of insidiously through the back door. And that's the big thing that I'm concerned about right now, among many other things which we'll get into. But thanks again to all of you. I know we're going to have a great discussion today, and thank you for everyone for coming. Thank you.
Attorney General Landry, you were actually the first Attorney General to not only fire the alarm on Zuckerbucks, you in fact sued them. So go ahead, just pivot off.
Yeah, well, good morning. I'm glad to know that we're having this in Washington, D.C. and not in New Orleans, because there's no way we could have gotten this size crowd at 8 o'clock in the morning in New Orleans. So y'all are just doing great. Yeah, you know, it's important to understand exactly what the Zuckerbucks program did. What they did was they used this money to to basically engage in a ballot harvesting operation through elected officials. Now, these are the kind of tactics we see in socialist, communist, despotism countries. I mean, make no mistake about it, that is exactly what happens in oppressive countries. When you tie the election system and one party together, that means you only can get one result. And that's what the Zuckbucks did. And so in October, well, actually it started in September of 2020, our Secretary of State alerted us to these grant applications that were going out in Louisiana. And when we took a look at it, we said, you know what, this is problematic. And we began to research the grant applications and what CTCL was trying to do in Louisiana. And what we noticed was that these applications were only going to, we have parishes, all of the rest of the world has counties, right? And we've got to be different. But we noticed that the grant applications were only going to parishes that had heavy Democrat, a concentration of Democrat voters, right? And so we drafted a lawsuit because we believed that the money was absolutely prohibited under Louisiana law, and we sued. We were the only state in the country at the time to sue. And it was disappointing. And, you know, Claudia and I were talking about, she said, you know, she's been ringing the alarm on the president's executive order that she discussed just now, and it's like crickets. Back in October, we told all of the Republican attorney generals, many of them, all of them are great friends of mine. We tried to explain to them what was going on, and they looked at us like just glassy-eyed, and they just couldn't understand it. But we see today through the investigations that have been conducted how corrosive this money was. And I think that, you know, finally, it's important to remember that it's not the government's job to entice the population to vote. It's only the government's job to ensure that every legal voter has an equal opportunity to access the ballot box and every legal vote is counted. That's it. That's it. The government's job is not to entice people to vote.
Thank you, sir. Let me just, before I go to Secretary Warner, my dad used to have a saying that was shared with me and some others. He said, you know, son, time management is very important. He said, I want you to understand, bees don't waste a lot of time trying to convince flies that honey is better than dog poop. So we haven't spent a lot of time trying to convince those advocates of big government socialism that our decentralized system, empowered by states, on an even playing field is the best system. We have put warriors in the Secretary of State's office in West Virginia, a warrior, and we, in fact, are proud of what you've been able to do. And cleaning up the voter rolls is very, very important. So, Secretary, even if that was not what you were going to lead with, make sure you work that in.
Thank you so much, Ken, and great to be with you. Folks, all of this stuff is interconnected. You go from H.R. 1, which was trying to federalize our elections, to the Zuckerbucks, to now the executive order. It's all, these are all tied together. It's just a continuation of the first part of the phrase, easy to vote. We all want it to be easy to vote. We have a right to vote, but we don't have a right to vote without any individual effort, okay? And that's what the integrity part and the hard to cheat part is that we need to focus on, and that is starts with the voter registration rolls. And so in West Virginia, what happened was, this starts back in 1993 with the National Voter Registration Act. And at the time, we didn't have these iPhones, we didn't have the personal computers and so forth. So getting people to register through the DMV sounded like a good idea. But folks, technology overtook that very quickly. And so now you can register online 24/7, that sort of thing. It's easy to get online. We don't need to continue to have the DMV or any of these 600 or some federal agencies that now the executive order is trying to say, make everybody a voter registration outlet. You're looking for trouble. And I have the majority of my county clerks in West Virginia, we have 55, the majority of them are Democrat. They don't want this because they see the problems with somebody going to HUD and registering under John Smith and going to the another agency and for food stamps or whatever and registering under John S. Smith or whatever. And you have now 2 registrations. And then they went to DMV and registered a 3rd time. And now it's up to the county clerk to try to clean that up. They're already overworked, underpaid. So in West Virginia, what happened before I got there is the voter rolls got bloated because everybody's going to the agencies getting registered, but my predecessors weren't cleaning up the rolls. See, that's the other half. See, the liberals got the let's get everybody registered. The other half, what the conservatives thought they were getting, is a requirement to clean up the voter rolls every 2 years, but there was no stick, nothing that forced them to do that. So by the time I took over, the clerks were coming to me, Democrat clerks were coming to me and saying, we've got to clean up these rolls, got to. And so that's what I ran on. Since I've taken office in a state that has 1.1 million registered voters, we've taken off 380,000 names from the voter registration list. Folks, that's how bad it's gotten, and I suspect a number of your states have similar type situations. So that's 1 in 4 have come off. We've put on 255,000 new voters. It can be done. You just need the will to go out there and do it.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, you will hear throughout this 1.5 days that CEI has an interactive map where we track progress being made in the states in terms of election integrity. It is not a punitive map. It is a map that leads to constructive action. And we have prided ourselves in working with frontline fighters and office holders to make sure we put in place those policies and those protections that these 3 panelists have talked about. We're going to get in about 3 minutes into question and answer because we want this to be as interactive as possible. But I want to give each of the panelists an opportunity to pivot off of what one or the other panelist has said that relates to what they do.
I thank you. Excellent comments by both of them, and thank you for going after the Zuckerbucks first and realizing what was going on. I mean, look at H.R. 1 is the For the People Act, which is what you've heard. That is the #1 issue for the Democrats. It's not all the other issues that we hear about, whether it's the border, inflation, or H.R. 1 is Nancy Pelosi's #1 priority, and that is the takeover of our elections by the federal government. And what the Attorney General was talking about with list maintenance and finding out the voter rolls. First of all, H.R. 1 bans voter ID. It bans it completely in the states that have passed it, through their own legislatures and signed into law. And it does, and this is, I think AFPI has come up with a lot of data. Scott Rasmussen told us, I think it's an 85% winner.
Right.
85% of the people across all demographics support photo ID for voting, which I find is interesting. Even Stacey Abrams now says she wasn't against it. So we know that this is a winner for us. This is an important issue because, and as everyone's alluded to, it's 1 citizen, 1 vote, unless you're from New York City, where anybody can vote. And that really undermines, look at New York State law. We sued the city. New York State law, New York State Constitution, and our federal Constitution clearly state that the right to vote, and when you talk about self-governance, is for citizens. People who have made the commitment to be a citizen, have the rights and responsibilities of a citizen, and then get the benefits of voting. So that's why it's so important that we preserve this sacred right to vote and to make sure that it's private. H.R. 1 also makes it impossible for boards of elections throughout the country to understand who's a voter and who's not. So when it comes to maintaining a list, H.R. 1 says, okay, so I live in New York, I go to college there, I registered to vote in Binghamton, for example, which is in my district. Now I move to West Virginia. Guess what? I'm still registered to vote in Binghamton. There is no way under H.R. 1, it's prohibited that actually Virginia could say, West Virginia could say, look, we've got a voter who's registered in Binghamton. So now you can actually vote twice in an election. Again, as Ken stated in his opening remarks, this undermines the right of every citizen to vote and undermines the integrity of my vote counting. And that's why people feel like this is a top issue. Look, it's been the #1 issue in my district for a long time, only now displaced by gas prices and by inflation. and people still care about it. It's a really important issue. Thank you.
Jeff?
Yeah, look, I think it's important to understand that the way we get fair, transparent elections in this country is through each and every one of you all participating. The things that Kenny and him are doing, the things that AFPI are doing, help give you the tools. But I think that Virginia showed us, the Virginia elections last year showed us the power that people have when they actually get involved in the system. When you start to say, guess what? I want to get involved. I want to go watch, I want to poll watch. I want to see what's going on inside of my precinct. You know, sunlight is the best disinfectant. What Claudia was saying about, let me tell you something. Mark Elias has been whipping us for decades now, right? I mean, one of the things that I've prided myself on is kicking him out of Louisiana. And it's not that I'm any type of Harvard lawyer. It's just that we don't put up with it, and we take them on, and we demand that our legislature responds as well. I mean, we think of the number of legislatures that after Zuckbucks was exposed, that went out and actually passed proactive legislation that said we don't want private dollars infected in our election systems. So I think that you all have the power to help clean up our election system here in this country. And it's important because I think, like Claudia said, again, when you look at the polling, there's very few people that don't want their election system to be fair. They want to win on a level playing field because that's what America is all about. It's important that we get an opportunity to debate inside the marketplace of ideas. That's what's great about America. So we're not fighting in the streets. You know, so again, Claudia, you know, I think again, it's getting involved in the process.
Right.
Folks, on April 22nd, 2010, my son was leading a combat engineer route clearance platoon in Afghanistan, and he was attacked. He was knocked unconscious. His gunner had a broken back. His driver shattered leg. They all survived. It took him about a year or two before he would talk to me about the incident. But when he did, I asked him about what your day consist of, and he went through the getting preparation and PPE, not what we think of with masks. We're talking lead vests and ammunition and everything ready to go. Then he said we'd get together before we went outside the wire, got together, got in a circle and prayed, and then we put the tourniquets on, and then we took off. And I said, the tourniquets? Yeah, Dad. And he kind of looked at me kind of strange, like, you know, why didn't I know that? Here are the tourniquets. They put one on each arm and one on each leg. And why did they do that? Because they knew they were going into harm's way where bad things happen. Well, it doesn't do you any good to have that tourniquet back in your hooch when you get hit out on the road in Afghanistan. It doesn't do you any good to have it in the vehicle. It doesn't even do you a whole lot of good if it's sitting in your first aid kit. It needs to be in position, ready to go, so when bad things happen, you can apply pressure. Folks, you are America's tourniquet right here. I'm looking at them, okay? You guys are already engaged. You're out there at the polling places. You're working at making sure the registration, the voting, the tabulation all goes correct. We need you there. But I need you to encourage everybody else that complains. I don't need the conspiracy theorists afterwards. See, it doesn't do any good afterwards. It doesn't do any good after you've been hit to go back home and then get the tourniquet. No, we need to be there right on the spot. So when the bad things happen in Philadelphia, Detroit, Maricopa County, we can apply pressure right then. We saw what happened in 2020. We tried to sue afterwards with Pennsylvania. Texas took them on. I joined, West Virginia joined the lawsuit with 17 other states, trying to fight it afterwards when the Supreme Court just says, no, we're not going to hear the case. It doesn't go anywhere. We need to apply the pressure when we see it coming on the front end, like Louisiana and West Virginia and other states did with the Zuckerbergs. We said we don't want them. Okay, we saw it coming and said we don't want them. We need you to anticipate and then start applying pressure as soon as it happens. Thank you.
Absolutely. We're going to go right into questions. We got started a little late, but let me just say that there are over 3,000 counties in America, over 3,000 counties, hundreds of thousands of precincts. If you're not in the room, you're not in the game. That's why Dan Schultz's precinct project, where they've been, in fact, training poll workers, to engage is such an important part of this effort to make sure that we restore the integrity of American elections and build up voter confidence. And so we partnership at CEI, and we, in fact, believe in being a force multiplier. So let's go right into questions. And is he, okay, right here.
Good morning. I have two questions, if I may. What are the typical core claims of voter integrity as veiled voter suppression, and how do you respond to those?
Say it again.
Yeah, say there.
Well, the claims of voters, the effort is at voter suppression. What are the claims behind that to substantiate that, and how do you respond to those?
I would say the number one issue is the Democrats say that if you have voter ID, that's somehow some form of suppression because you're asking for identity, you're discriminating against illegal immigrants. And understand something in New York, when you register to vote, illegal immigrants can get driver's licenses. People that are undocumented can get driver's licenses, and they can sign up to vote because we have an honor system. And we also have a system that doesn't allow you to verify that somebody is a citizen or not. Remember, you can be documented, you can be a green card holder, but you're still not eligible to vote. And they think that that's somehow some kind of voter suppression. But think about this. One of the facts prove, and I think AFPI put this data out, the more people that vote, the more likely the Republicans are going to win. Just so think about that. Republicans vote in very small numbers in New York. When you all think of New York State, everyone thinks it's New York City. New York City actually is just part of New York. Upstate New York is a wasteland of Republicans that are dying to get a Republican governor or statewide elected office holders. But that's what and we think of New York City, but because of this federalization and because of the Albany one-party rule, all run by Democrats, we're seeing this even in rural areas and suburban areas like mine where you see this vote harvesting. But again, I want to mention people are on top of this, and I've traveled around the country, and I'm going to do one shout out. I apologize, but I have to. The former president of our National Federation of Women Republican from New York is sitting right here in front of me. They have been, Ann Chockett right here. Also, the Florida delegation, they have a thing called Heels on the Ground. Now, that's a grassroots turnout game. I love the Heels on the Ground for the women. But they have been instrumental in making Florida a Republican state. It was always a swing state. And these women have gotten out and gotten the vote, so.
Let me address that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was asked, why is bipartisanship failing in America today? And the answer is because we're living in 1984, George Orwell's. We're in the time of doublespeak and newspeak. Okay, doublespeak is, or doublethink is when you can hold two absolutely contradictory ideas at one time, and they do that through the manipulation of the language. And so look at it. What's a woman? Okay, what's marriage? You can go right down the list there. Don't pay any attention when the other side is trying to manipulate our language and turn it on us, that it's our fault, that we don't agree with their social construct of what things is. Ben Franklin said that we make decisions every minute of every hour of every day, and we make those based on a value system. So the question is, what is the value system that we're working from? And I think everybody in this room knows that this nation was founded on Christian principles, and that means there are guardrails. Now, we have freedom within those guardrails, but when you go outside of that, that's why John Adams said this Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's unfit for any other. We know what truth is, okay, and that we act within that. When they try to take us outside that, then we're into that 1984 land that they're trying to take us down a different path, and we don't want to go there.
And we're going to go to another question, but let me just say that in Ohio, requiring people to vote in the precinct in which they lived was considered to be voter suppression. But that's the way that we have accountability at the local level. And so the language manipulation is important. Over here.
So, good morning. Hello, Claudia. Hello, Jeff. I'm Katie Arrington, recovering politician from South Carolina, to which we have some of the best voter integrity laws that were just passed. And we have a phenomenal job. We did poll watching. We did everything that we were supposed to do. And I lost in my primary because our primaries are open. And one side fled the other. And what is the position of AFPI in getting to that, the closed primary system where we can actually, jungle primaries I know exist in some states. I think in Louisiana, y'all are jungle primaries. But for those of us who are open, we had Democrats just going in mass because they wanted to elect a weaker candidate to go down in the fall. Are you guys working on that at all?
Well, look, this is the catch-22. We at AFPI believe that individual states make that determination. And we have an opinion, but in terms of advocacy, we think it has to happen at the state level. Okay.
Well, I'm an AG, so I get an opinion. When I got that job, my mom said, "You finally got a job where you get an opinion." Might not count, but look, Katie, I tell you, you bring up a great point. In addition to discussing the primary systems in this country, I think another thing we should be conscientious about and be ready to battle back on is ranked choice voting, okay? That is another buzzword for the liberals being able to elect who they want. That creates some mathematical formula where voters go in there and have to pick a whole series of candidates that they choose so that they don't have to come back. And so I think two things to that. Number one, I think the primary system is important, and we should be trying to strengthen it rather than dilute it. It is amazing, though. It is amazing that if you go into places that have watered down their primary system and you look at who it was that led those particular efforts, what you will see is that it was the liberals who watered down and the Democrats who watered down the primary system. Why? Because they're always consistently trying to find a way to rig and cheat the system because their ideas don't work. And so they want to shove those ideas down the throats of the American people because they can't get elected. And so, I think that strengthening the primary system, pushing back on ranked choice voting are things that will help strengthen our election system in the country.
That is our opinion, but that is your agenda in South Carolina. We got to get it.
State Representative Mark Fincham from Arizona, also candidate for Secretary of State. And again, I really appreciate the work you do with Cleta Mitchell, and I'm just so glad we have our Friday calls. My question is this. Maricopa County, the steaming garbage heap of an election that we basically did an audit on, I think we showed how not to do an audit. I'd like to hear your perspective on, could we set up, I'm a Six Sigma guy, so I look at things in process maps. Could we set up an interstate audit process, one that we all agree on what to do pre-audit, pre-election, during the election, and after the election, so that we have some level of uniformity among the states, so that so that Arizona can have confidence that South Carolina has a free and secure, fair election. I'd like to hear your perspective on setting up that kind of an audit system, so that we can all be confident that the election was secure, that it was free, that it was fair.
I thank you for being a candidate too. I know it's how difficult that is, and also to Katie as well. Look, I think we need to have a consistency in auditing, but anything that sounds like giving the federal government mission creep to be able to federalize anything, even in the auditing, worries me a little bit, because now you're talking about what could potentially be in H.R. 4, which is if the Democrats can't get H.R. 1 done, and just so everyone knows, everyone thinks Kyrsten Sinema is a moderate. She is a co-sponsor of H.R. 1. She is not moderate. She's just holding on with Joe Manchin on the filibuster. But Joe Manchin said, I can't go for H.R. 1, but I could go for H.R. 4, which weaponizes the Department of Justice to go in and create and pressure local governments, precincts, counties to do consent orders. So I worry that giving any power on a federal level would push that to DOJ, and they would ultimately move in. My county, which had become infamous after my 100 days of counting, is now under a federal consent order. They were bullied by the Department of Justice. They have highly left-wing partisans in the Department of Justice, and those people are now running the elections in my home county because it's been federalized. And I just worry, I don't know if there's more you can maybe address how we can do this in a way that doesn't allow the federal government to step in. Thank you.
The most dangerous two words that exist in this country right now are consent decrees. Okay? You need to demand that your attorney generals do not sign any consent decrees or allow any of their local governments to engage in a consent decree. A consent decree it basically means that the federal government now comes and takes over whatever operation that is. And if you want to know how well they worked, let me tell you about cities that are under consent decrees in their police departments. Baltimore, New Orleans, Chicago. You want to know what the common denominator of those cities are? They're some of the most dangerous cities, some of the most lawless cities. And and Claudia is right. Consent decrees are just the worst. And we should have the ability to fight back because, quite frankly, I think they're unconstitutional. A state is absolutely sovereign. And I'll tell you this, when you talk about, I know we're always, that's a problem with conservatives. We always think, well, we're just going to get one rule. It's going to fit all. Everybody's going to just behave. It doesn't work like that. When you want to talk about fixing an election system, I love to use Florida, as Claudia mentioned earlier. You want to talk about voter suppression? Florida's had voter suppression for the last 30 years. Ron DeSantis comes in, works with the legislature. They tweak. They don't do some overall election reform. At least I don't know. The press didn't report it, which I think they would have. They go in and they tweak a few things in Florida. And then all of a sudden, Florida goes from purple or blue to just red. I mean, they didn't just move a bunch of Republicans into Florida, a bunch of conservative voters in all of a sudden. They just fixed the election system. So again, I think that just going into your states and demanding your representatives tweak your election system fixes the election system in this country.
And I think it's important that we continue, and we will do it here at the Center for Election Integrity. And Hogan Gidley is here, our executive director. He works on this every day with our regional policy directors, is to understand what the best practices are and to give them amplification, and so that we can get more and more voluntary participation in a rational system like you have articulated. Look, because of the president's visit, we're going to be pressed for time. I just want to let you know that your engagement is so very important. I remember when the All-Star Game was moved from Atlanta to Denver because of the reforms that the state legislature had taken on there. Stacey Abrams was pounding the table. They moved the All-Star Game from a city that was 57% black to a city that was about 9% black. And I asked Stacey Abrams, I said, let me ask you a question. The $110 million that would be generated economically from that All-Star Game, and I know this because I am a shareholder of the Cincinnati Reds. I said, let me ask you, why would you deny your community that? I said, why would Delta, that is located in Atlanta, be an advocate for moving the All-Star Game? Because the state legislature there moved for voter ID. Photo ID. I said, now, just think about this. When I get on a plane, or I purchase a ticket to get on the plane, what would the counter agent say if I showed them my utility bill from my ID? I said, if I left tickets for anybody in this room at the will call window, you could not go and just say, I'm Ken Blackwell, I'm Joe Smith, here is my utility bill. You have to show a photo ID. She, in fact, we won that case. I mean, they moved the game, but we won the argument. And that's what I want you to understand. We will win arguments all across America if you stay engaged. We will give amplification to your efforts. We don't have the encyclopedia of complete knowledge of election integrity, so it's a two-way system. We listen. Your point is well taken. We then try to find the best ways. I'll end, since I introduced baseball, why it's important for us to understand. Satchel Paige of the American Negro Baseball League, I had an uncle who was one of the founders of the American Negro Baseball League. Satchel Paige played for Indianapolis Clowns, and my great uncle was a great friend of his. Satchel Paige said, and for those of you who don't know baseball terminology, I apologize. But he said, you know, it is very difficult. As a matter of fact, he said, it is damn difficult to steal second base if you want to keep 1 foot on first. I thank you. We thank each and every one of you for taking a break for freedom, taking the risk for freedom. Because when you drain people of their risk orientation, you make them humanoids and subjects. And what has made us the shining city on a hill in all of the world in terms of our constitutional republic is that we understand the difference between a subject and a citizen. We understand, as our framers did, we understand that our fundamental human rights are not grants from government, they're gifts from God. And state governments, all government, can only do one thing, and that is to recognize those human rights, protect those fundamental rights. When we do that, we engage at the local level, we win. God bless you.
Got it.